I'm interested in what your thoughts are about what does make a successful partner.
There's no single template. We have such a wide variety of people in the firm, such a diversity of skills, interests, backgrounds. But I would say three broad categories. The first is being a
Today's guest is Aster Crawshaw, Senior Partner at Addleshaw Goddard. He shares insights on law firm leadership, lateral hiring, and the evolving relationship between in-house teams and private practice in the age of AI.
The underlying legal answer will always be the same. The difference is about how you communicate it and how you make sure it feels properly relevant to the business your client is trying to run. And that's where I think a lot of lawyers fall down, is they will give the excellent advice, but actually they're not being sufficiently attuned to the specific business needs that their client has.
At the moment, there's a huge amount of talk about what's going to happen in the future in terms of relationship between clients and law firms on the AI front, how that might change things going forward.
There are three things I'll say which help me sort of develop that. So one, there are...
Welcome to Beyond Billables, lessons from top law firm partners, the podcast where successful and renowned law firm partners hopefully reveal the secrets of their success. I'm Stephen Rodney, founder of Integrate Coaching, where we produce tailor-made lateral integration programs for partners joining new firms, and formerly co-founder of Fox Rodney Search. I'm really delighted today that we're being joined by Aster Crawshaw, Senior Partner of Addleshaw's, the London-headquartered full-service international law firm, who have actually just officially opened their new global headquarters in the City of London, right next to the Bank of England, in Loughbury. I saw Andrew Bailey at your opening do on LinkedIn.
So delighted to have him with us, welcoming us to the neighbourhood.
Indeed. So welcome, Aster. Welcome to the city neighbourhood. It's great to have you with us. So maybe we could start, Aster, with me just asking you about your route to becoming a lawyer, how you became a lawyer, and then how your route to partnership and how you become senior partner of Addleshaw's.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and delighted to be with you. Thank you very much for inviting me on. And the reference to all these references to being successful law firm partners brings back imposter syndrome, which I'm sure we'll come back to at some point in the discussion. So I had a fairly circuitous route in. So I studied history at university, and when I went to university, I had no thought at all of becoming a lawyer. But as I thought through various different career options, the law started to sing to me. And the one that I was most interested in previously was actually investment banking, was going in and working in corporate finance. But then when I read about everyone being made redundant in their mid-20s and then careers ending in mid-30s, I thought I'd want something a little more long-term than that. And the thing I realized about the law is it's one of those careers that just gets better the longer you do it. And so when I was in my second year at university, I applied for vacation schemes and did a few of those. One at Clifford Chance, one at a firm called Fred Chumley Bischoff, which no longer exists, but is now, most of their partners went to Forsters or to Eversheds in London. But I ended up training with Linklaters and was there 5 years. Absolutely loved it. Really enjoyed the work, really enjoyed the people and the culture of the firm. But we had children quite early. My wife and I got married while we were still trainees, and I found I needed a little bit more balance in my work-life balance. And so after 5 years at Linklaters, I went to Barlow Lyden Gilbert, which, not that this is a pattern in my career, which also no longer exists, now part of Clyde & Co. And was there very briefly, but it wasn't for me for various reasons. And after 6 months, I went on secondment from there to Ernst & Young Global, which had been a client that I'd done a lot of work for when I was at Linklaters. And as with so many secondees, and this is the bane of law firm managers' lives now, I loved the secondment and ended up staying and was at EY Global for 4 years in their team, both in London and briefly in New York, looking after M&A, international structuring, and various other things that come across the desk of a jobbing in-house lawyer. And much as I enjoyed it, it was very specialist, and I struggled to see how I could keep my engagement going for another 25 years or so. And also because it was so specialist, I couldn't see how I could find my way out of that into other kind of in-house roles if that's what I wanted at some point. And so as I was getting to 7 years qualified, I thought perhaps it would be worth having another bash at upper mid-market city M&A practice. And so after interviewing at various firms, I chose Addleshaw's actually not to do what I ended up doing, but to do mainstream M&A. And then when I got to the firm, I discovered they had this market-leading professional practices group. And when I was selling myself internally to M&A partners, I was apologizing for everything I'd done for the last 4 years at EY. And when I talked to the team in the professional practices group, they were all excited about it. And so I very quickly sort of changed course and joined the professional practices group and have been there for 18 years now and absolutely loved it. And then 2.5 years ago was elected as senior partner of the firm, which I'm happy to talk more about that process, the thought process for that too, if that would be of interest.
Yes, it would be interesting. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I was approaching 50. I was very much enjoying what I was doing. I loved my practice, but I had got increasingly involved in some internal management roles. So I sat on the executive team for our corporate and commercial division, so a group of 6 or 7 that ran the team supporting our group head. And I also did a lot of work directly with our managing partner. So I ended up effectively being sort of the firm's transactions lawyer. So when we were doing mergers in Scotland and then in Ireland and various other things which never happened, some of which got reported and some didn't, but didn't execute, I worked with the managing partner on those as lawyer and advisor rather than as business leader, and really enjoyed it and had a very good relationship with our managing partner, John Joyce, who stepped down coming up to 2 years ago. And so when the vacancy for the senior partner role came up, I was encouraged by a few people to sort of think about it quite seriously. It came a little earlier for me than I would have expected. Ideally, someone would have done 4 years and then I would have had a cleaner sort of 8 years ride through to the end of my time as a partner. But you can never guarantee how these things are going to go. If someone else had done it when I first stood, they would probably wanted to do 8 years rather than 4, so 2 4-year terms, by which stage it would have been too late for me. So I suddenly found myself having to make a decision much earlier on than I was anticipating. And so I thought very carefully about the role and what I thought I could bring to it, with a particular focus on governance and client relationships. And those are 2 things I'm really passionate about. And I'll talk a bit more about this as we get on a bit in the discussion, but also really passionate about every partner's obligation to take some responsibility for the efficient running of their firms. And it felt like a good opportunity. And when I talked to others, they all thought that I had skills that might be suitable for the role, or at least could be adapted for the role, because inevitably it's not the same job. And so I decided to put my hat in the ring alongside 3 other partners. And so it was quite a competitive election process, which I have to confess was quite stressful, not because I was that bothered about whether I won or lost, because I was very happy with what I was doing before, and if I didn't win, it would have been a disappointment, but I very happily just got back to what I was doing. It was stressful more because, having had a lot of control over my career, there was this fork in the road, and other people were deciding whether I took the left turn or the right turn, and I wouldn't know until the very last minute which one it was going to be. And I like to plan ahead and look forward, and just found I wasn't really able to do that. So I found that quite difficult. But on the positive side, I learned an enormous amount about the firm and the business during that process. So I got around and spoke to a large proportion of our partners, not quite all of them, but a large proportion of them, across different offices, different jurisdictions, different practice areas, and just hoovered up all the information knowledge I could have, which meant that once I did start the job, I was certainly better informed. I still had a long journey to go to sort of get into my rhythm, but I certainly knew more about the business as a result of having had to go through a contested election process.
That's very interesting, actually, that you felt, because a lot of partners now that I speak to who go through a contested election process, law firms have changed. So historically, if you didn't win, then you could go back to your practice. I think there's in a lot of firms, there's a feeling, a little bit like in politics, if you don't win, then you kind of maybe have to move on from some firms. But that doesn't sound like that was the case with you guys at all.
We've had that in the past. I mean, in the fairly distant past now. I'm thinking back sort of 15 years where someone stood for a role, didn't win, and then left. But actually, in all subsequent elections, all of the unsuccessful candidates have remained in the business. I think it may have been slightly easier for me because I wasn't coming directly from a full-time leadership role. So we don't have many full-time roles in the firm, so senior partner, managing partner, and our group heads, it's not quite full-time, but very close. And so a lot of them remain close to clients, but not leading on execution. So because I had been about 80% client serving still, I'd had this sort of short hiatus while I was campaigning, but ultimately I could have just gone back to what I was doing before. Whereas I think if you've been in a full-time leadership role, so something like a group head, you stand for election for managing, probably more suitable for managing partner in that case, and you don't get it, then you may feel it's quite difficult to then join the leadership team of the person who beat you in the election. And also might be quite difficult to go back to full-time fee earning because you might not have done it for a while. But here I can certainly see how either of those things could happen. And actually, so Andrew, our managing partner, his election was uncontested, but John, his predecessor, he had a contested election, and the partner that came second in that election actually joined his executive leadership team and supported him for the next few years in running the firm. So, I mean, John did a great job of sort of bringing him into a central role, which ensured that we didn't have that leakage of talent. And the last thing we want is for people to feel like standing for election is kind of, well, you win or you lose. It's you move on to one role in the firm or you continue in a different role in the firm. We want to maintain the top talent in the business.
Yeah,
It's
well,
sometimes
that's very
different
healthy.
in the big accounting firms, I think, because people are often going for that top job at a very late stage in their partner career. And if they don't get it, you can see how I've seen some of them want to go off and do other things. So they can go and have an executive role in another business, and accountants are a bit more appealing still for those kind of things than lawyers. Or they can very quickly build up a really strong non-executive portfolio. So I think in the accounting firms, you see unsuccessful candidates moving on, perhaps more than you do in the law firm world.
Yes, no, I think that's definitely right. And did you just keeping with the senior partner role, you mentioned that you're focusing on governance and client relationships, two major things to focus on. So that was your decision. There's not a kind of, to use a better word, job spec for the senior partners to what the senior partner's role is?
No, you're absolutely right. So there isn't a job spec. I mean, there are three things I'll say which help me sort of develop that. So one, there are provisions in our partnership agreement that say what the role of the senior partner is, but they're relatively brief and quite generic, and most of them relate to the role as chair of the board. Then our leadership succession group, when my predecessor, Charles Penny, was coming towards the end of his second term, they put together a sort of it wasn't quite a job spec, but it was kind of like a skills matrix that they would expect someone to have. And so I had that as well, which was very useful in sort of understanding better what expectations of the role were. And then, of course, I had examples from others. So Charles, my predecessor, but also other people I know in the market. And some of those have been mentors to me over the years. And so I've been able to see what they've done with the role and how they've been able to add value. My predecessor, Charles, was very successful in the role, did it for 7 years. He was always very clear that he wouldn't do it full time. His fee earning practice was very important to him. And when he was first elected, so that would have been nearly 10 years ago now, the firm was in a very different place. So we'd only just started on our international journey. We were a third of the size that we are now. And there was a sense that he could probably maintain his client practice whilst doing the senior partner role. I think by the time we got to the end, when he and I spoke about it, he said, well, look, I've managed to maintain it, but I think the next person's going to need to give more time to the senior partner role. We're now today 21 offices across 16 jurisdictions, 3,000 people, 2,000 lawyers, coming up to 500 partners. It's a very different business. And so, of course, if you then say, well, I'm going to do it full time when my predecessor did it, half time maybe, it's then, well, what are you going to do with that time? What is the most effective way of contributing? And the governance side, Charles did very well, chairing the board. The client-facing side, he did some of that, but obviously it wasn't full-time role, so he couldn't do it as much as I would then have the opportunity to do it. And then other things I've been able to do, sort of supporting our responsible business strategy, helping drive sort of culture and integration across our offices. There's some internal bits as well. But governance I've tried to do as professionally as I can. And obviously I did some of that in my fee earning practice working with law firm and accounting firm clients. But ultimately, as you will know, it's very different to do than to advise. And so it's felt like quite a big transition for me. And one of the things we did last year was had an external board effectiveness review. So to bring in experts to come and observe the board, interview board members, and give some recommendations about what we could be doing more efficiently. And I think that's something professional firms rarely do, certainly not something we'd ever done before. And if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I thought we need to do that, I might have said, oh, well, I can do that. I've done some of that kind of work as a lawyer, not as a governance expert, and I'm sure I could sort of muddle through. But actually, it was extremely useful having someone external come and do it. And so that governance piece, we are changing, shifting that over time. And the client-facing side, again, that's been fascinating. And there is a real opportunity in a firm like mine for someone senior to build a different kind of relationship with clients. And that's having different kinds of conversations with general counsel clients, and not just focused on what are the things we're trying to get executed for you this month, but more about future of the profession, future of the in-house profession, what kind of training and resourcing needs they're going to have going forward. And then also an opportunity to build relationships with C-suite at clients as well. So to get that real commercial insight, which will help drive our strategy. So it's useful in terms of our board discussions, but it also provides greater insight for our sector teams as well. And so they can understand really much more effectively, what are the commercial challenges, opportunities coming down the line for their clients.
Good.
So that's been a fascinating part. So the client-facing bit I've absolutely loved.
And we're going to come back to that. Actually, we're going to look at what factors may affect law firm success going forward. But with you, I'm interested in what your thoughts are about what does make a successful partner, how the skills maybe you possess have helped you to become one, and then we'll look at how you need to change when you get into a leadership role. And just before you answer, I was very interested to hear that you'd spent, well, I think it was, you said 7 years as a basically M&A lawyer, or maybe I heard that wrong, or a number of
good
years.
maths there. So it wasn't quite. So when I was at Linklaters, I was there 5 years, 3 years qualified, 2 years a trainee. And I was technically an M&A lawyer while I was there, but a lot of what I was doing was for professional firms, was for the Big Four accountants. And so it was slightly unusual M&A. So like when Anderson went bust, for example, we acted for EY in buying up Anderson practices. But when I wasn't doing professional practices stuff, I was doing mainstream M&A in the meantime. And then when I was in-house for EY, I did some M&A when I was there, but it was mostly internal structuring work. So, and of course, as a professional practices advisor, the main element of my practice is M&A as well. So M&A between professional firms.
They are related. They are related.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So from your point of view, what does make a successful partner?
It's a great question. And I would say, to start with, there's no single template. We have such a wide variety of people in the firm, such a diversity of skills, interests, backgrounds. And it's very difficult to sort of predict from day one exactly what's going to make someone a success. But I would say 3 broad categories I think I'll start with, and then we'll see by the end how far I've gone. The first is being an excellent technical lawyer, and that's a bit boring. It's not very fashionable to say that anymore, but I do think it is the starting point for anybody to be a successful partner at a firm. You need to be a good technical lawyer to get the promotions up through the associate ranks. And if your partners don't have confidence in you as a technical lawyer, they're not going to put you in front of their clients. And, sometimes law firms disparately describe someone as a bit techie. And usually I think what that means is not so much that they're a very good lawyer, but perhaps they lack some of the other skills. And so I think certainly all of my partners, all the ones I've ever come across in practice, have been very good lawyers as a starting point. And the second is then about your skills as an advisor. And that's where I would distinguish being excellent technical lawyer from being an excellent legal advisor, because of course the last thing your clients want is a PhD on every question they ask you. They want you to properly understand their business needs. Why is it they're asking you that question? What is it that they're looking to try and resolve with the answer? And then who are they trying to communicate that to internally? And so that skill of really getting under the skin of what your client is really after, what their business needs from you, I think is a whole different skill set to being a good technical lawyer. And that requires, good sector knowledge. It requires good people skills. It also requires adaptability, recognizing that one client might want advice in one way, another in a different way. And so you've got to have that agility to be able to reflect what it is your clients are looking for. The underlying legal answer will always be the same. The difference is about how you communicate it and how you make sure it feels properly relevant to the business your client is trying to run. And that's where I think a lot of lawyers fall down, is they will give the excellent advice. They'll think they're being commercial, but actually they're not being sufficiently attuned to the specific business needs that their client has. And again, the second bit of that, I think, is about understanding your client's position in their own business. So who's their audience? And one person put it to me recently that when the general counsel's sitting around the executive table, they're the only person around the table that thinks in words and not numbers. And
Right.
what the general counsel wants to do with your advice very often is take it to others in the executive team and say, this is the advice we've had, and this is then what I think we need to be taking as a course of action as a business. And so how can you make that as easy as possible for the general counsel? So again, one general counsel referred to it as flick-on ability. So how easy would it be for them to just forward the email they've had from the lawyer to the other people on the executive team and for them to read it, understand it, and reach the right conclusion? General counsel spend a lot of time repackaging advice they get from their external lawyers, and that's not time well spent. And then the third thing, so one, excellent technical lawyer, two, excellent advisor, but then three, I would say, is being a good leader in your own business, is recognizing that as an advisor, that's not all you are. You are also a leader of your firm. And so partners are what's often described as owner managers. You're also client service as well. So you're also involved in delivery. But that management piece, I think a lot of partners don't spend the time on that they should. And when I'm speaking to new partners in our business, one of the messages I always give is you need to anticipate you're going to spend 10 or 15% of your time on internal matters, whether that's graduate recruitment, whether it's mentoring juniors, whether it's getting involved in some of our diversity interest groups, other responsible business activities, charity fundraising, sports clubs, all of these things that make a professional firm a fun place to work and that make it a successful business. And a lot of that is inevitably focused on people because we are ultimately people businesses. Partners will often say, well, I need to spend all my time on clients because we've got no clients, we've got no business. It's like, well, that is true. But if you've got no people, you've got no business either. You need to focus on both of those. And I think too many lawyers don't see that responsibility for managing their firms in the same way as they do the client service piece. And so I do say to all of our new partners, you think about how you're going to spend that 10, 15% most effectively, something you're going to be able to contribute, but also that you're going to learn from and you're going to enjoy, because it's always much better if those things go together. And for me, it was graduate recruitment. So very shortly after I became a partner, I started to get involved in our graduate assessment centres and then became our training principal for London and then across the whole firm. So that was, for me, a very early opportunity to get some proper management responsibility and to have the opportunity to really think about how we want to shape the firm for the long term. And I loved it. It's wonderful seeing new people coming through. And while I was training principal, we also implemented the first apprenticeship program. So there was an opportunity for the firm to be sort of innovative and market leading, but also to do something which has been now quite successful in driving a social mobility and ethnic diversity agenda as well. So it was a lot of fun. It was very interesting. And we were also able to affect change while I was involved.
Yes, so you got there's got a few guests I've had actually who got into graduate recruitment. And as you say, it must be nice seeing people coming through probably to partnership by now, and I thought, well, people you recruited as graduates.
And now general counsels too. Yeah.
Oh, and now general, that's even better from your point of view. So having had that taste of kind of management experience as not on the graduate recruitment side, and now evolving through to a leadership role, what different attributes do you think you need to do that as opposed to, or maybe they're the same, but as opposed to being a sort of jobbing partner?
In a leadership role, inevitably, there's much more of a focus on the people side. I spend a lot of my days talking to people, and that does require a different mindset. So most lawyers, a big chunk of your job is project management, is just getting stuff done. And when I was first elected, people said, what are you concerned about adapting to the new role? And I said, look, if you want me to get a job done, a project completed in 3 months, I will get that done as well as anybody. But ask me to affect cultural change over 4 years, I'm not quite sure how to go about that. And so I think I went into it, I started off with very much that sort of project mindset of how can I just get things done, get things achieved. and realize that actually achieving change in a professional firm is not that straightforward. You've got to bring people with you with big, complex organizations, and you've got to invest a lot of time in really understanding both the challenge it is that you're addressing, but also other stakeholders, what other interests do people have in that, and how you don't just assume you've come to a solution which is going to work, but properly listen to people. And most importantly, properly listen to people on the business services side of the firm. So not only the partners. And we've made quite I would say, an important and successful transition over the last 15 years from being very much a partnership decision-making body that everyone gets around the tables and makes decisions on which paper clips we're going to buy, to a much more delegated management structure with a much stronger executive team, which is principally made up of non-lawyers. And I never like that expression. I don't like describing anyone by what they're not. We had someone in our marketing team who studied rocket science at university, and he used to describe lawyers as non-rocket scientists, which I quite like.
Excellent.
So I spent a lot of time sort of learning more about that piece of the business. And, we've got 3,000 staff, 2,800 of those are lawyers. 1,200 of business services. And it's a bit of the business that most of our partners just don't spend that much time engaging with. So a lot of it is about listening and recognizing the limits of your real power and the extent of your soft power, the ability to sort of influence and drive change over time. And that although you've got this leadership role, you're not certainly in the senior partner role, and I think it's different in the managing partner role, but in the senior partner role, you're not in a position where you can just click your fingers and something gets done. It's much more about sort of long-term influencing, building relationships, building trust and confidence. And that felt very different from being a transactional, execution-focused lawyer.
So you never were attracted by the prospect of having what you call the ability to click your fingers as a managing partner. That wasn't something you wanted to do.
Managing partners can do that a bit more, but not 100% either.
Yeah.
But no, that never appealed to me in quite the same way, actually. Firstly, I think I hadn't had the right mix of management experience coming through. So most people who go into managing partner role, they will have run either a big team or a big office, and they would have had that kind of P&L responsibility. And that's not to say you can't do those roles without it, but I think it's certainly much easier if you have. And so John, our previous managing partner, he'd run our restructuring team for a long time. Andrew, our current managing partner, had run our Middle East practice for 10 years or more. So both had a really strong track record of success managing P&Ls. And I just think that kind of experience makes you much better qualified. They're all different challenging roles, so not 100% ready in any case, but much better qualified, much able to adapt more quickly to the demands of that role. Whereas the senior partner role, I think it's easier to come into that from a range of different backgrounds, but definitely important to have humility as you come into it about what you're still going to have to learn as a person in a very, very different job to the one you're used to.
Yes. Okay. Moving on. As you know, and as I mentioned in the introduction, I used to be a recruiter, and I now help integrate laterals. And so I'm sure you've been involved in recruiting a lot of laterals in your time. And I'm just interested, what you see as the main reasons, whether some of them are very successful, some are less successful, and how you measure the success of your laterals and the ROI they produce for Addleshaws.
Well, we do a lot of lateral hiring. So I think last number I saw, we've done about 35 in this financial year so far, still another couple of months to go. And we're around 480 partners now. And so at my first partners conference as senior partner, I think at that point, less than half of our partners had been with the firm more than 5 years. So it's been a very rapid growth, and a lot of that has been driven by laterals. That hasn't slowed down internal promotions at all, I should say, but laterals are a big part of that. And I would say we have had pretty good success with our lateral hiring program. Sometimes people say, well, it depends how you measure success. So if success is have they delivered the business case they brought to you, well, maybe 50-50, but has someone actually thrived and succeeded in the firm, potentially with a whole different business case than the one that they originally suggested, then you look at much more like 80% success rate, I think. And of course, successfully recruiting, integrating a lateral, it starts long before they actually sign on the dotted line. It's all about those conversations you have very early on, not only about their business, but also about their approach and the kind of culture that they thrive in, the kind of relationships they build. And we spend a lot of time speaking with laterals, and that doesn't mean one person speaking to them lots of times. It's them speaking to lots of people. And so sometimes laterals, when they come to the final board interview, which is the bit that I'm now most often involved with, they've spoken to 12 or 13 partners in the business over the course of 6 or 8 months. And so they've had the opportunity to ask, every possible question. Try as we might, we can't get 12 or 13 people 100% on message. So they will have had most likely the warts and all view of the firm, of the practice. And so they will have a very clear expectation of what they're coming into. But also that means that all of those people they spoke to will be supportive of the hire. And so when someone arrives, they've got a big group of people who are feeling properly engaged with that partner's integration and success. We're obviously strategic about it. So we only hire people where there is a gap or an opportunity to grow. So that means that people rarely come in and find themselves sort of fighting elbows out for space. There's kind of a clear space for them already. And then once someone arrives, there's a really thorough, detailed integration plan. So Nikki Lawson, our Chief People Officer, has refined that over the years. And actually, she's coming to the board in a couple of months' time to talk again about how that's been going and what further refinements we might want to make. And that includes obviously lots of sort of introductions, coffees across the business. So probably 30 or 40 meetings for someone when they arrive. And each one of those probably creates another 1 or 2 opportunities as well. So after 3 or 4 months, usually by the time their restrictive covenants have expired, they've just about finished having coffee with everyone in the business and have got a really good sense of where the opportunity lies and how they can make it successful. But we also have a new partner program. And so both our recent laterals and our new promotes go on that. And that goes on there's some of that is in person, some of that remote, and some of that is sort of homework that they do themselves. A lot of work goes into it, but most of it is just about them feeling like there's a clear opportunity and there's a supportive, collaborative group of partners around them who want them to succeed.
I mean, that's obviously is crucial because, I mean, the research in this area shows that if you don't open up opportunities for laterals, that doesn't mean deliver work on a plate, just open up potential opportunities within the first sort of 6 to 8 months that they're there, then the chances of them really becoming properly integrated and staying goes down a lot. Because people then become very inside focused, internally focused, and think, well, I'm not getting much from here. I might as well just focus on what I do. And I found it very interesting.
I think that's a critical point, Stephen, about opening up opportunities, because it's very rare the lateral arrives on day one with a full book of business. Or there are usually covenants involved. Often there are projects which were sort of part of the way through they haven't been able to bring with them for one reason or another. They need to introduce the team to new clients and build confidence for the clients in the new firm. And so one of the things our laterals will most often comment on when they arrive is the truly collaborative nature of the partnership. And that is mostly not just about a warm welcome and a hot cup of coffee, but it's about introductions to clients. And that's what they really appreciate, is those opportunities to get out into the market and to be able to sort of sell what they're doing with the support of a partner beside them. And that really makes you feel properly part of a team early on. So that's something that we spend a lot of time doing. And the laterals that just sort of sit in the corner and sort of, go work through their online Rolodex and call everyone, that's often where it's slightly more challenging because they haven't built those relationships, networks internally, and they haven't felt that sense of being integrated into the business.
Yeah, and actually sometimes if they do arrive with a full caseload straight away, that's very good in the short term, but sometimes not great in the long term from what I've seen, because people assume that in a 18 months time, when that work kind of tails off, that person is integrated. In fact, they're not integrated at all.
I wouldn't have thought of this if you hadn't said that, but that's exactly what happened to me. So I joined the firm as a managing associate, sort of 7 years qualified from EY Global. And as I was leaving, so in my last couple of weeks, the general counsel said, we've got this big restructuring project in Asia. Would you like to run that for us from Addleshaw's? And I was like, rubbing my hands with glee, arriving at a new firm with a fantastic new project. Unfortunately, it was a project that took a year nearly. It only required me, so I didn't have any associates working on it with me, no partner working on it with me either. And I spent a lot of that time traveling in Asia. And so after a year, I was like, look at this fantastically successful year I've had and the revenue that's been generated the firm wouldn't otherwise have had, and the client's delighted, et cetera, et cetera. And the head of my group said, well, that's all very well, but I don't know how to sell you into a partnership process. I don't really know what you do, and no one's worked with you. No one understands what it is you've been doing over there. And so actually I wouldn't say my partnership was delayed by a year because of that, but I certainly had to scrabble a lot harder in my second year to get into that process and really show people who I was and what I was doing. So actually, because I didn't come in as a partner, I didn't think of myself as an example of that until you've just mentioned
No,
it.
you are. No, you are. And the other thing you mentioned, which is you started off on this section about talking about if you define success relative to someone's business case and whether they've delivered it versus how well they've integrated into the firm and become a part of the firm. I think you said 50-50 on the business case and 80-20 in a good way on the second stage. I do find a lot of firms focus too much on that business, what I call the recruitment business case, which is very different from the integration business case, because it may be a year since they did just to start with, a year since they did the business case. And I've spoken to a couple of firms fairly recently who are so focused on whether laterals are delivering on the business case, even not really taking into account the covenant issues, which I said was just not really very fair on someone. So it's interesting you said what you did.
Completely. And, the world changes, and opportunity that we see internally when we're thinking, well, what's the gap in the offering to clients that we need to fill, suddenly is very different when you have someone arrive and you really get to understand properly their skill set, and the market moves on as well. So yeah, I mean, we will always look back at a business case and say, well, how well has someone done against what they promised? But then we'll also look at, why it might be if things haven't come across. And I mean, you know this better than I do, Stephen, but numbers in business case, they rarely translate directly, and we heavily discount them before we take them to the board as well to anticipate that and try and plan around it. But it's really important that people feel that they can find new opportunities as well. The business case isn't a straitjacket, it's kind of a direction of travel, but it's not rails that you can't step off, to
Well,
mix a lot of metaphors.
and indeed, I won't name the person, but there's someone in your equivalent role in another firm who is quite well known in the market, who was a lateral, and I know took 3-4 years to really start motoring. And there was a lot of disquiet initially about them, but now they're the senior partner because when they did get going, they actually made sure that their relationships are institutionalized around the firm, and they've been a wild success. So sometimes it takes a lot longer than just the initial year or even 2 years to integrate. So if you've done your work carefully on whether they're the right culturally for you, then investing long term is pretty key. I think that before we move on, the one thing that always used to not amuse me, used to horrify me, is when department heads basically were hoping that a lateral would perform better than all their existing partners in their own team. And I used to think, well, that's a recipe for disaster potentially. So I'm sure that doesn't happen at Addleshaw's.
Well, we have had some laterals who have very quickly outperformed others in
Oh,
their
well,
teams.
if
So
they have, but that's
it
different.
has happened, but I agree you don't necessarily recruit them with that target on their back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, indeed. So you mentioned obviously in your role as senior partner is going out and client relations. So, at the moment, plainly, there's a huge amount of talk about, what's going to happen in the future in terms of relationship between clients and law firms, both on the AI front and also, how PE, if I'm not suggesting you give me an insight into whether Addleshaws will take PE one day or not, but a big law firm no doubt will quite soon, I'm sure, how that might change things going forward. So focusing on those couple of areas, how do you see them?
So in terms of that relationship between in-house and private practice, I mean, obviously I have some direct experience having been in-house, but it was a long time ago, 18 years ago, that I came back into private practice. So I spent some time sort of at the coalface, if you like, and it means I've got a very close interest in how the in-house profession has developed. And I would say over the course of our career, Stephen, it's been the most significant change there's been in legal practice is the development of the in-house career path. And we've got to the stage where probably half our leavers go in-house rather than to other firms or leaving the profession. And a lot of those are our most talented. A number of occasions where we sort of tap someone on the shoulder and say, we now think that we want to put you onto our partner track. We think that that's where your future lies. You're doing a great job. We see how you could be the next custodian of the business. And they say, well, actually, nice to hear that. That's a little milestone for me. But now I've achieved that, I think I might now start pursuing in-house opportunities because actually long-term, that's where I want to be. So you've seen in-house teams develop in a number of different ways. And obviously it varies depending on the size of the organization. But now a lot of the real specialist expertise lies in-house. So real sort of sector-focused things around sort of industry rules and regulations. So if you look at defense sector, for example, the expertise around defense regulations and it is more likely to sit in-house than it is in private practice. And you have in-house lawyers able sort of tiny specialist areas, but then also having to do some of the more generalist work as well, because teams aren't covering everything. So you have in-house teams coming to private practice either for specialist technical areas that they don't have the expertise on in-house, or for overflow work. And both of those could be affected by technology and AI. So for the technical specialist areas where they don't have the experts in-house, they're going to get access to at least information more easily through technology than they have historically. Now, they've had access to a long time to practical law, LexisNexis, sort of other sources, but it's rarely as sort of tailored and specialized as in-house teams want. And as the LLMs develop, they will be able to give more, I'm being careful here, I was going to say accurate, I'm not going to say accurate, but more tailored and focused advice to in-house teams, which may mean they feel less of a need to go out to private practice, particularly for those areas where the risk of getting it a little bit wrong is lower. So on the specialist side, technology is going to have an impact on what comes from in-house out to external counsel. But then in terms of volume, you're going to see that change as well. So one general counsel put it to me a year or so ago, said, well, look, if I can put into whatever product you choose, the last 10 M&A share purchase agreements that we've used, and ask it to tell me what the key issues have been where we've won in negotiations or failed, and then I can put in the first draft for the next deal and ask it to tell me to analyze those areas for me, that's going to save a lot of the work that I was previously giving to external counsel. So some of that volume stuff may not be coming out to external counsel as well. So that kind of capacity overflow work may not come. And so I would say even more important that the external teams get closer to their clients, their sectors, their industries, so that we can show what it is we can still add in terms of value, both from a technical perspective, but also from a commercial perspective, but also that we've got access to the very best technology products, so that if in-house teams aren't able to source those themselves, they can come to us and say, actually, could you please run this stuff through your products, and either we can give an overlay analysis on the top of it, or we can just give them the raw materials and allow them to do that in-house. But I see that as potentially quite an important part of the next stage of partnering between in-house and professional firms. And so in some ways, although the demand for the stuff we're doing at the moment, that technical expertise, capacity overflow, it could reduce. It might result in relationships becoming closer, because where you are advising, you're much better informed about what your clients can do, and you can add much more value through having a lot of the drudge work being done through tech. But then the other element of this discussion always is about whether technology actually increases the total volume of legal work. So what I've been talking about so far is the work that's already done. But actually, if you speak to anyone in-house, they will have a list as long as your arm of projects that they've not been able to do because they don't have the time or resource. And suddenly those projects will become viable using technology. And so actually, there could be a whole stream of work that develops that's not there at the moment. And that, again, is where there'll be a great opportunity for law firms to partner with in-house teams to use technology to make those projects viable and efficient and meaningful.
And do you think that law firms have the financial strength to really invest the amount of money they'll need to in tech to really help their clients without, for example, taking PE type or other types of investment?
Yes. Yeah, that was a very neat segue back into external investment. And I think the answer is it depends. So I don't think many law firms are developing their own start from scratch bespoke technology products. I know some are. But, if there are 600 legal tech products today, there'll probably be 1,000 next year. And then in 5 years' time, there'll be 4. So the chances of a law firm being one of the ones that creates the one which is going to take over the market is quite remote. It is important that law firms do invest in understanding the products that there are, in testing use cases, experimenting, really getting to grips with them. And that does require significant investment. So there's an element to which you've got to have a certain degree of scale to be able to afford to make that investment in legal technologists, software engineers, and know-how type lawyers who can spend time really experimenting and working with clients to develop use cases. So there's a degree to which scale, I think, becomes more important. And there's also something just about operational efficiency and effectiveness. Is if you've done nothing, then starting today is going to be really hard. If you've been leaning into technology for the last 10, 15 years, and you've been using some of the early legal tech products, I won't call them AI, but things like HiQ for sort of, word search in documents and discovery and litigation, then actually what's happening now, it's a very significant step up, but it is the next stage in development. And so both your technologists and your lawyers will quite quickly be able to adapt to what's now available through Gen AI and the LLMs. And there'll be another step with quantum in a few years' time. And again, if your business can adapt incrementally as the technology develops, I don't think it needs a completely disproportionate level of investment. And when I say disproportionate level of investment, I mean investment you can't fund either out of revenue or out of debt or partner capital. That's going to require you to go to external investors. Having said that, there are firms that aren't there and will need to make a very significant leap in terms of their use of technology. And that will require a lot of money, both in terms of investing in the tech itself, investing in new teams to experiment and adapt the tech for what your clients need you to use it for, but also skilling up your lawyers as well. And so I can see how tech could be one of the drivers towards PE for professional firms. But as is now said by many in the market regularly, taking external investment itself is not a strategy. It's a way of funding your strategy. And it's quite an expensive way of funding your strategy. So firstly, you've got to think, well, what is it we need to do that's going to transform the business that requires a significant level of financial investment? And then the second is, how could I fund that? And you look firstly at your own resources, inevitably they're the most cost effective. Then you look at external debt. And only if at that point do you look at external capital. Now that's if you're genuinely looking at external capital as a way of funding an ambitious strategy. Of course, many firms have used it as a way of funding succession, so for partners to take some money off the table. And obviously that's much more difficult to do through internal or debt funding. And others have done it as a way of and this I think is a really interesting concept, as a way of driving cultural change in their business. That they could probably just about fund these kind of strategic investments through their own resources or debt, but actually they need to make a really significant change in the way they run their firm and partner attitudes to the business. And having external capital and having a private equity investor sitting on your shoulder saying, well, actually, if I was a corporate, this is how I'd be doing it. Why is it you're doing it so differently? And if we're going to be agile and make the kind of investments and changes we need to deliver a return on investment for me, the private equity investor, we can't have 20 partners meetings before we decide to open a new office. We can't have everyone testing a new tech product before we invest in, 100 licenses for it. And so interestingly, when I had discussions with some of the private equity investors, that's the bit they've ended up talking about quite a lot, is about the way in which a private equity investment can really transform a business very quickly. So the kind of cultural change that would take 10 or 15 years for a management team to do, once you've got private equity coming in, you're forced to do that over the course of 18 months, 2-3 years. And that, I think, is quite an interesting opportunity for some firms.
Yes, and it's interesting. You as the senior partner obviously are going to be the person. Have you noticed more of your partners coming to you to talk about, maybe we should take PE? Are you concerned that when the first, what I would call, if we leave DWF aside, because they took PE for specific reasons to do with their float not working out as well as they hoped, but when one proper law firm, can I put it like that one of your main competitors, not that I'm saying DWF is not a proper law firm before they send me a nasty letter.
Keep digging.
That your partners will go, well, X and Co have taken PE. Why don't we? Are you concerned that some firms may take it for the wrong reasons, which could lead to disaster, basically?
Yes, and I don't think it will always lead to disaster. I think we're used in the legal sector to effectively having a single business model that everyone follows. Everyone has a partnership. Very few of us recognize goodwill, so you don't buy in when you become a partner, you don't get bought out when you leave. You take the profits while you're a partner, and that's the return on your investment. But we're one of the only sectors left in the world where everyone operates the identical business model. So I think we're going to see over the next 5 years a range of different business models being applied. And will one of them be private equity in a large firm? I think it's quite likely. I don't think it's certain. Others are much more confident about it than me, and we know that some have looked at it very closely and decided against. But I agree doing it for the wrong reasons, and doing it without your eyes very wide open could be catastrophic for a firm. So I would say, answering your question very directly, at the moment we're not under pressure from our partners to do it. In fact, on the contrary, they're very wary of it. It's possible a slight exception for those approaching retirement who are thinking that if you're going to do it at some point, do it now. But that's a tiny minority, and it's only quite light-hearted observations rather than actual pressure. If one of our competitors does it, and that suddenly results in the projection for a partner's earnings over a 5-year period to be dramatically different, then that could put some pressure on. But the basic model, what it requires is for partners to take a drop in their current income.
Yes, it does.
In order to create EBITDA, to create a real residual profit that you can then apply a multiple to. And then it requires quite a lot of that multiple to be reinvested back into the business or to be taken as shares. And so in the short term, partners won't necessarily take a huge amount off the table in terms of cash to go and buy a new car or a big holiday. They'll have a drop in income, and their return will depend very much on the strategy being successful. So on the business really seeing the kind of growth that is promised at the time they take the investment. And what we've seen so far is firms not actually delivering on that growth. And so partners who have taken a sacrifice in income haven't necessarily taken a huge amount off the table on day one, haven't then seen their lost income being replaced by a capital gain down the line. Now, for the most senior equity partners in some firms, so a lot depends on how you're structured. So some of the firms that have done it have had a very small group of equity partners with most of the capital. They've taken a lot of money off the table on day one. And so it's worked well for them. But when you look at the next generation, it's not been anything other than a pay cut and an opportunity that then hasn't actually delivered. But I think the investors are becoming more sophisticated. They're understanding the market much better. And we've obviously seen GT take the investment from Cinven. And I know from conversations with various people involved that a lot of the time invested in that project was looking at the next generation of how do we make sure this REM model works. And we, through our team, have worked with some of the accounting firms that have taken external investment, and that's been a huge area of focus for them. So it's absolutely possible to structure this in a way which works for successive generations, but it still depends on the strategy actually succeeding. And that's the thing which I think why I come back to where I started with. It all starts with strategy. So unless you're literally just looking to get rid of an older generation of partners and saddle the next generation with debt, but that's the only way you can do it, it's got to start with strategy. And strategy is what will determine whether it succeeds or not. And there's absolutely no reason in principle why it shouldn't succeed in a law firm environment, as it has in almost every other business environment that you could think of.
Okay, that's thank you for that very full answer. That's very interesting. I mean, moving back to you a little bit as we move towards the end of this podcast. You mentioned 35, 40 minutes ago about mentors that you had in your career, and I'm interested if you want to cite any of them or describe any of them that had a positive influence on you.
I mean, delighted to. So let's see how many I can think of, because I have to say I'm someone that really values this, so I rely on it quite a lot. So very early in my career, right at the beginning, Richard Godden, who's a corporate partner at Linklaters, and about 70% of the work I did at Linklaters was for Richard. And he actually retired a couple of months ago after 46 years, I think it was, at Linklaters. And we kept in touch over the years. And he, I would say, particularly taught me technical legal skills. So when I talked earlier about kind of the 3 areas of focus that a partner needs to have, sort of excellent technical skills, excellent client skills, and then proper commitment to the running of their business, I would say Richard's influence was primarily in that first bucket, which is exactly what I needed as a trainee in an NQ up to 3 years qualified. But then when I went in-house, I then worked with Richard as external advisor as well. So then in that next period, I learned a lot about client service, and I learned a lot about the value of having someone working with you who really understands your sector and your market. And Richard had acted for all of the Big Four accountants at that point. And so he brought a huge amount to that. So I was very spoiled by Richard and his team as an in-house lawyer who was, probably asked them for support across a wider range of things than the average might, because I knew them so well. So Richard's hugely important. And then once I got to Addleshaw's, Richard Linsell, who had headed the professional practices group here, he was approaching retirement by the time I joined. And firstly, as well as my experience being relevant to the professional practices group, he also took me aside and said, look, I'm retiring soon. There's an opportunity coming up, and timing is everything in life. And so that helped me make that decision to move into the professional practices group. But then his last couple of years, he stayed on beyond normal retirement age because he was so much in demand. But his last couple of years, he went part-time and he doubled his hourly rate. And he said to clients, well, you've used me for 30 years. I can do this for you. But Aster's now much more in tune with what's happening, as are William and John, the other two senior people in the team at the time. Why don't you use them? It's half the price. They'll give you a much better service, and they'll be there for the long time, whereas I'll be gone soon. And then by the time Richard actually retired, his proudest boast was that his phone never rang, because he'd already transitioned all of those relationships, and I was one of the beneficiaries of that. And then more recently, I've had sort of formal coaching, which I won't cite, but formal coaching which has been very helpful. I've had 3 different coaches over the course of my career. Each of them have been extremely useful. One particular issue challenge I was focusing on at a particular transition point. But one person who's been sort of consistent all the way through is your namesake, Philip Rodney, who was the chair of Burness and who I first met through the IBA, the International Bar Association, but who's just a very kind, generous senior practitioner in the market, very experienced in every aspect of law firm leadership as well, and who just over the years has just given me little pokes, prods, and whenever we meet, he won't allow me just to have a sort of casual conversation about life, the universe, and everything. He always makes it very focused, and so not a formal coach, but very much a mentor. And I would really urge people to open up with people who express an interest in their careers, because you get so much from people who can really understand the challenges you're facing, and every person's situation is slightly different. And just to give you stories, experiences, and it's rarely a kind of a clear sort of roadmap that takes you through every different waymark, but it often gives you a better sense of direction, and it's just an opportunity to reflect. And I think a lot of us don't spend enough time to do that.
Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, Philip is, and he's someone that recommended you for this podcast. So he's my namesake, but unfortunately no relation for me. But yeah, I've only got to know him the last few years, and he's a very fascinating guy, and I agree with you on what you said. So sort of final proper question is, what's the kind of best moment you've had as a partner, and maybe one of the less good ones that you can think of?
I'm probably not allowed to say the time I got the phone call saying I was going to be made a partner, which was without question my career highlight. Yes, I got the call from the managing partner, and I rang home to tell my wife, and she put my then 6-year-old son on the phone and said, Magnus, Daddy's had a promotion at work. And he came onto the phone and he said, Daddy, what are you, a general, admiral, commander? And I said, no, Magnus, I'm a partner. And he said, what? So I have one of those in the lunch queue every day. So he was very unimpressed, brought me back down to earth. But I think I look back on some of the more challenging client engagements I've worked on. And one of those, I think I'm safe talking about it now, when Pannone, the law firm up in Manchester, was bought by Slater and Gordon. And it was a very complicated transaction. Pannone ended up splitting 3 ways. So some went to Slater and Gordon, some created what's now a very successful firm, Pannone Corporate in Manchester. And then a third sort of went to the Four Winds. And so that was over a year's worth of work. And I remember the last few days coming up to completion were probably some of the most challenging in my career. One particularly memorable moment where we were on our second night, as in we'd worked all the way through one night, and it was now sort of 2 or 3 in the morning the next night. And my client who'd been at my side the whole way through, Emma Holt, she asked me a question which I was giving a very sort of lucid and coherent answer to. And she said, Aster, it sounds like you're giving excellent advice, but it's a little disconcerting that your eyes are closed. So the brain was working, but physically I couldn't actually raise my eyelids. So getting that over the line was certainly one of my biggest satisfactions over the years. Disappointments. Yes, I didn't prepare for this question. So some of them will have been pieces of client work we didn't win. There were definitely some tough moments during the senior partner election process. We've had tough times while I've been senior partner, but I won't share some of those. But the bits that have made them hard, it's always been about people. It's always been trying to get the right balance when either you or someone else has got something wrong and you're trying to put it right. So try and sort of build trust or assess whether someone still merits trust and working out what the right course of action is. And that is always incredibly difficult because inevitably, although lawyers try to have emotional intelligence, and we're not psychologists, we're not able to assess these situations where some professionals are. And that's kind of situation where I find it's particularly useful to bring in sometimes the non-lawyers. So particularly people from the HR team are just brilliant at supporting in those situations. So I won't give you a specific example, sorry to disappoint, but the difficult bits are always about people.
Yeah, no, there's no surprises there, I have to say. And yeah, no, that's very interesting. So my two final questions, which I like to ask, which as people who view this podcast know, taken from a different, much better and well-known podcast called the High Performance Podcast. So what are your three non-negotiable behaviors for you and your team?
So integrity, number one, you always need to be able to trust people. And almost always when you're dealing with difficult stuff, either within the team or in wider business, it's where someone's trying to cover up something that's gone wrong. And I always think we should have the confidence to own up straight away. And actually that's what builds confidence in a team, is actually dealing with challenging situations together. I'm always, if anything, too soon to admit to errors and faults. Occasionally I'm told I can sort of let things ride a little longer and they might work themselves out. You don't have to fess up straight away, but that's always my approach. So I think integrity is absolutely number one. Number two is, I think, thinking about the other people on your team. And that's, of course, client focused, but it's also about your team internally as well, and ensuring that you're contributing in a way which is proportionate to your skills, and that you're not taking all of the interesting work and leaving the dross to others, or that you're slipping off early and letting others do the hard work, because I think that is quite corrosive in a team where that happens. And I think the third, I would say, is agility, is being able to recognize that sometimes something feels slightly beyond your skill set, beyond your experience, but having the courage to go and have a go anyway, being very open about it, but having a go anyway. And I think that's how we learn, is by just stretching ourselves. Someone once told me that you should always feel just beyond the edge of your comfort zone. And I've always found that quite a productive place to be, if not always comfortable.
Is that a bit like the surgeon, the old-fashioned surgeons who used to say to their junior doctors, you watch one, you do one, and then you teach one? It's a little bit like that.
Yes, I like that expression. Yeah.
What's your one golden rule to be a successful partner?
Oh, I think rely on the people around you. I mean, 100%. I mean, it's kind of the clues in the name, partner. We're in business together. And obviously, I don't only mean rely on your partners, but the whole team that's around you, because it's not a one-person game. The only way to succeed is through collaboration, cooperation with your colleagues. And that's why building trust, that's why I started with integrity, is so important, is that is how you build a team around you and how you become part of a successful, high-performing team. So that, to me, is the most important, is to recognize that this is a team effort. It's not a solo operation.
Very interesting. And thank you, Aster, for being our guest on Beyond Billables, Lessons from Top Law Firm Partners. Thank you for being so full in your thoughts, very transparent. And I can see why you're the senior partner, actually, at Addleshaw's. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear from you. So thank you for making the time.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you, Stephen.
So join us on our next episode of Beyond Billables, Lessons from Top Law Firm Partners, when we'll have another top legal practitioner who will share the secrets of their success. See you next time.